Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Bookings India. Welcome to the month's second development seminar. I'm Shamika Ravi, the Research Director at the institution. I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Sisir Debnath from the Indian School of Business. Sisir is one of our leading microeconomists in India. He has incredibly sound technical expertise in looking at household level data, looking at disaggregated data across different sectors of interest. Today what he's going to present is, while it is within the school system, so it's pertaining to education, but it's really about how do you use technology to improve governance? How do you improve performance of public schools? How do you improve performance of bureaucrats? So it's broadly a governance question that he's going to address. It's a joint work with Sheetal Sekri from University of Virginia. The rule of the game, Sisir, is you have an hour to present, and then we can do half an hour of Q&A with the audience. I will have a few questions directly. So come, Dazzle.
Okay, thank you, Shamita, for that generous introduction. I don't know about leading, but I do love to play with data. So, this is joint work with Sheetal Sekri. She was also my advisor, and we started working on this around in 2015ish or so. And here is a working paper version. So comments and questions are always welcome. So I will also be taking down notes in the middle, but I guess we are having a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So, one of our Prime Minister once regretted that every rupee that we spent on public programs, only 30% of it reaches the poor. But that was long time back. But leakages and inefficiencies are big concerns in government projects. And what it does, it essentially, apart from the making program ineffective, it erodes the trust of people in those government programs. And in general, we start believing government doesn't work. You cannot provide public goods. So we always, in developing countries particularly, we have programs which are intended or targeted towards certain beneficiaries because we have limited funds. And oftentimes these benefits do not really reach to the intended beneficiaries. It's a different argument altogether, who should be beneficiary, who should not be beneficiary. I'm not getting into it, but once you identify a certain set of beneficiaries, the funds do not really reach them. It does reach them, but there's a large chunk, it doesn't reach to them and often reaches to someone who are not supposed to be beneficiaries. So there are these two dual problems. And this is observation by World Bank and in the 2003 report. And Lance Pritchett even puts harsh words, even harsher than this, and he says that institutional capacity to implement this program is high enough or thin enough to call it just failed. So these programs have failed. And so erodes the public interest in the government program. At the same time, it also affects the intended goal of the program. I mean, if you really carefully look into it, so most of the public programs have some benefits or some intended, welfare, question that we want to answer. For example, midday meal, you can think of it as if they are trying to entice kids to come to school and improve learning outcomes, but at the same time, it's also trying to push certain micronutrients that are not available in their daily food intake, and also trying to make them healthier so that our health expenditure later on when they become adult is much less, right? Similarly, for example, when government is subsidizing LPG for some beneficiaries, of course the intention is to make the process of cooking much more enjoyable, but at the same time it is also trying to reduce indoor air pollution. So the moment a particular public program fails, of course, you do not deliver that public good, but at the same time, you are also not achieving certain other educational goals, health goals that the program was designed to achieve. And once a particular program is rolled out, certain set of infrastructure gets created, certain softwares gets created, certain bureaucratic positions get created, an institution gets created. Dismantling it and creating something new is very, very expensive. So the question that we are trying to answer is, are there scalable low-tech technologies which can help us to make existing public service delivery mechanism more efficient or not? Okay, and probably the question will be clearer in a few more slides. But this is a topic which has a larger context, and that context is very, very recent, and it is called the personnel economics of the states. So, and this personnel economics of the state is also a sub-area of something in economics that we refer to as principal agent problem. To put it very, very loosely, principal agent problem had traditionally been defined as the problem of a firm, and the firm or the owner of the firm, you can call them shareholders, and they have essentially hired a person, a manager, in order to look after the daily operations of the firm. And the principal owns the resources, but the principal doesn't get to see what the manager is doing in their daily lives, right? And then they sign a contract about what the salaries are going to be and what would be the performance on the basis of which the manager would be evaluated later on. But the problem is the principal can never see exactly what this manager is doing. And at the end of the day, if the outcome of the efforts of the managers are bad, the manager can go ahead and say, oh, it was not my fault. I put in all possible efforts that I could, but simply there was not enough rainfall, so my output was very, very small. So this particular problem of information asymmetry that we refer to in economics is also common across various other fields, not just for firms. You can also think of the state as a principal. You can also think of the bureaucrats as a agent, and there could be multiple bureaucrats. Bureaucrats have their officers working under them, so they could be another layer of agent, and there could be district officer, sub-district officer, headmasters. So you can think of a tree diagram where there is someone sitting on the top, there is another person under them, then there is another person under them, and they all try to achieve something. But the problem is no one gets to see what is the effort level that is being exerted by the lower level bureaucracy, the lower, the bureaucracy below that, ultimately the headmaster, and ultimately what the beneficiaries are getting. Okay. And this is called multiple agent or principal agent problem. And we don't need to know much about I will digress a little bit. I just wanted to mention that this is how economic theorists would see this problem. But this problem exists in public good service provision as well. And traditionally, the way the theoreticians have tried to attempt to solve the problem is essentially to design the incentives properly. So you have to design the salaries of the executives properly in order to make sure that they are putting their best foot forward and the principal is realizing its goal. But there are other possible solutions as well. You can monitor them better. You can put cameras in schools the way the first paper did. So Duflo, Hanna, and Ryan, they published an AR in 2012. It's one of the highly cited journals in microeconomics. And what they did in Rajasthan, they put cameras in classrooms and saw what the teachers were doing. And I took photographs of them with the students every single day with the date stamped on the photograph. So that simple monitoring technology improved teacher attendance and later on improved students' learning outcomes and so on. So that was one way you could use these monitoring tools in education. Then the second paper, which is by again Ramahana and Dhaliwal, which got published in Journal of Development Economics very recently, 2013. They look in Karnataka and they look at what happens to hospitals when the nurses and the doctors are supposed to get their thumbs scanned to mark their presence. And before this particular introduction of this tool, the rate of presence for hospitals and nurses, doctors and nurses were below 40% and 50% respectively. So it improved their attendance rate and subsequently improved utilization of public health care by neighboring villages, because villages earlier would not come to hospitals because they would say, why should I go there? I mean, the doctor is never present, right? Then there has been a bunch of other studies as well. Karthik Muralidharan, Paul Niehaus, and Sandeep Suktankar, they recently published a paper in AR again. And here the idea was that we can make public programs much more, what should I say, we can use technologies which are very, very simple to make sure that payments are going to person who is the actual beneficiaries, and that they show that the efficacy of the public goods delivery increases. So they did it in a very, very large scale randomized control trial in the state of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. So similarly, Ben Olkin also used monitoring versus audits as to see how quality of the roads are determined in Indonesia and so on. But by and large, most of the paper, what they do is they show you that monitoring helps. And so there are some literature in this area, and what we are doing is attempting to do something very similar, but we are using a very large scale rollout of a particular intervention in the state of Bihar and in the context of provision of midday meals. So I wouldn't spend much time, but just to make sure that everybody is on board. The midday meal is one of the largest school feeding program in the world. And currently it feeds about every day freshly cooked meal to 120 million kids, which is a challenging exercise in itself. And the reason why this particular program was instituted is to essentially combat malnutrition among school-going children. It started with providing them with raw grains, and then later transitioned to cooked meals and so on. So initially kids in the primary schools were eligible, but then later it was increased. The beneficiary list included the upper primary kids going to grades 6, 7, and 8 was included in the list as well. But there is so many newspaper reports that we keep hearing that this particular program is just fraught with corruption. People, siphon off the resources that are meant for the kids. The food quality that is served is not good, and typically there are reports of huge over-reporting of beneficiaries, because the more you over-report the beneficiaries, the government allots more funds, and you are eligible to receive more grains as well, which increases the scope of siphoning. So, and I went ahead and talked to the director of midday meals in a couple of states, and what seemed to be a big problem is the flow of information. If I ask the midday meal director in any particular state and ask them, do you know what fraction of schools provided midday meal today? He will not have a response, and he will bring out a A4 sheet with district level information on what percentage of schools in each of the districts were serving midday meals at least 3 to 4 months back, because that's the frequency at which data reaches them. And this data gathering process itself is very onerous, right? How do you know what fraction of schools in a district is providing midday meals quarterly, right? So the data collection process is, I'll describe the process in a bit, but the data collection process involved that you start asking headmaster, are you cooking meals or not? That is done by a block level officer. For those who don't know, block is a subdivision of a district administratively. And then the block resource person collects all this information and then submits at the district level. So this is all computerized. There is a MIS system through which this data is entered, and then someone at the district level collects this information, creates an average out of it, submit to the state level. Then the state level folks, then they collect it, send it to the ministry. Then ministry then allocates funds and allocates grains through FCI, and then through the same channel, both money and the grains flow back to the school where it is intended, right? So you can see that this collection procedure, manual collection procedure of the data is very, very onerous, and Bihar sidetracked the system, and in order to get more detailed data, more real-time high-frequency data, they introduced an IVRS system. So IVRS is interactive voice responsive system. It's the same annoying voice that greets us the moment we call Airtel, that you have to press this in order to know your balance and so on. So they use the same technology. Apparently this is a very cheap technology. And the way they did it is essentially they created a database of all school teachers in Bihar. Close roughly 80,000 schools, they created the database. And then one automated phone call goes to every teacher, or at least one teacher in every school, and every single day, right around the noon, and before they served meals, or rather after they served meals. And they ask 3-4 questions. The first question is, did you cook any midday meal today? And they don't necessarily need to have a smartphone to answer these questions. Feature phones also do for answering this type of question. They have to press either the button 0 or the button 1 in order to confirm no or yes. And then the response gets registered in the system. And then the next question would be how many kids had midday meal, if the response was yes. And then again they punch numbers according to how many kids were getting meals that particular day. And then they ask the third question varies. They might ask what is the enrollment. If they did not serve midday meal, they ask what was the reason the meal was not served, and so on. So this is a humongous data set that is getting created with about 80,000 responses every single day of the year. So apart from collection of this data set, which was completely dependent on whatever the headmasters felt they need to respond to, there was nothing else that was done. So just regular collection of information from the headmasters who were responsible to serve these meals. Now, why do we think that this act of collection of data alone can improve provision of meals? And there are multiple reasons to think why it might. So now what you can do, you can actually cross-tally the information that the middle tier bureaucracy had been submitting to the state government. You can see if some district is saying that 100% of the schools in our district is providing midday meals, you can check using the IVRS data whether the headmasters themselves are saying that or not. That's number one point. Another thing is that once the headmaster responds through IVRS, it is essentially one sort of a government document that enters the system that I have saved this much. And if there is an inspection team that arrives on that day, they have a reference point to see what the headmaster has reported to the government earlier, right? So headmaster now can be held responsible that they have responded differently to the IVRS and the inspection team found something different. And there are heavy penalties if there is any discrepancy. Every school is supposed to be inspected once a year.
Once a year?
Yeah.
And the frequency for release of the funds from the government to the schools?
So that depends. It is quarterly. And above all this, there is a community monitoring involved too. So all these responses by the headmasters are open in the public. So there is a website called globahar.org. And there are drop-down menus through which you can find your school and see what your headmaster has responded on a particular day to the Midday Meal Authority, whether they supplied any meals or not, right? So these are the reasons that we believe that this might affect the provision of midday meals. And as you can see, it's just collection of regular data from those who are supposed to provide this benefit. And so what do we do? Well, this is an empirical study of what is the impact of this particular program on provision of midday meals. So our idea is very simple. So Bihar started this program in 2012, and we collect data on midday meal provision, both from government and from another NGO. Okay. Now the NGO is Pratham, and we have data from Bihar, from 2009 until 2014 from the government. We also have data from the NGO from 2009 to 2014. So we just see how the average provision of meals is changing in Bihar over time. And not only in Bihar, in order to have a control set, another set of states where this program was not introduced, we also cross-check what is happening in those states around that same time. So that's the idea. So essentially, we examine changes within Bihar before and after. This is also referred to as event study analysis. This is very common in finance when there is very high frequency data and you know that something happened in one point in time. And but this can be there could be confounding factors if you use only data from Bihar, because in Bihar there could be something else happening. Let's say statewide, there's something that changed in the midday meal provision all over India around 2012, and somehow we captured that if we look at just Bihar. So just to have another set of controls, we include bunch of neighboring states of Bihar as control state, and we see what is happening in those states around that time and compare their averages with Bihar's average. So essentially, this is referred to as difference in indifference approach. So where the first difference is within Bihar, before and after the policy change, and the second difference is coming from the difference in other states before and after, and then we take the difference between the two, which is referred to as difference in indifference. And then we do a lot of empirical checks of robustness to make sure that whatever we are estimating are validated for different concerns. So we estimate a generalized DID model, which I explain in a bit, and then we also control for district-specific secular trends, which might indicate that things were improving even earlier, but somehow we are capturing this in our data analysis. So the roadmap for the talk is, I will talk very, very briefly because almost everybody here, I'm guessing, knows what midday meals are. And we'll talk about the IVRS system, we'll talk about data, the estimation strategy, results, and the robustness checks will be embedded on those results, and then we'll conclude. So what are midday meals? Essentially, it started with the National Program for Nutritional Support to Primary Education in India, which in 1995. And initially, students were given raw and cooked food just to incentivize them to come to class. Because there was a concern that kids don't come to class because they have to work outside, because families cannot afford to put food on the table. So that was also to prevent child labor at that time when they introduced the program. And then around after 10 years, the program transitioned from raw food grains to cooked meal. And then there was some major changes in 2006. So the government added a lot of micronutrients. And then the minimum calorific requirements were increased, so the food portions increased. Some states included eggs. The coverage was expanded, and not only the primary school going kids, but the upper primary kids were also included. And the way it works is essentially central government provides free grains. For rice eating districts, or states, it's going to be rice. For wheat eating districts or chapati, they will provide the wheat, and the state government share the cooking cost, so which is referred to as conversion cost. Grants to the school could be of two types. It could be recurring or non-recurring. Recurring grants are essentially grants for conversion costs, and non-recurring costs are essentially costs to set up the kitchen, utensils, and so on and so forth. And of course, the grants vary by school because the grant size is determined by the number of enrolled children. And the moment you have something like that, the grants are dependent on number of enrolled children, you can expect what is going to happen. Okay? So if the fund that is school is getting depends on how many children are enrolled, it obviously incentivizes enrolling more and more children to the school, and that's exactly what happened. It's also important to know how the funds flow from the government to the schools. So first, schools report their annual requirement to someone called block resource person, and these reports are essentially one-page, very simple reports which include number of beneficiaries, how many deep meals that are served, and the status of the funds and the food grain that has been supplied to that school. So the block officials then submit these reports to the district official, where they go back to the block headquarters in a software, and this goes directly to district officers, and then ultimately it goes to the midday meal director. So these data are aggregated first at the block level, then at the district level, then at the state level. Based on these aggregated reports, a annual work plan budget is made by the state, and it is submitted to the project approval board of the Ministry of Human Resources. And then the Ministry of Human Resources, based on these AWPB reports, releases the amount of grain, the amount of money, if they are approved, and more in general they are approved. And all these AWPB reports are available online. And if you are wondering what are the figures for Bihar, it's all the districts always providing 100% of the schools are providing midday meals. That's what it says. So, and then once the funds are sanctioned, they flow back to the school following the same chain of bureaucracy. So the way IBRS system works, typically a primary school is supposed to have 5 teachers, and some of them could be permanent, some of them could be temporary, and the government has actually created a database of all these teachers, and IBRS system calls up one particular teacher from a school at random every single day. If the school is there's no national holiday or state holiday, and they ask some simple questions such as, did you cook meal today? Press 0 if you did not. And you may ask, the valid question to here ask is, how many of our headmasters do have a phone? And you'll be surprised, the penetration rates of mobile telephony even in rural India, it's almost more than 100% actually. So for our data set that we analyzed in 2012 when the program was started, about 99% of the headmasters had their mobile phones registered. So essentially, after completing all these calls, after the end of the day, the software summarizes the entire data at the district level. So if you are the state midday meal director, you can log in and you'll see that district level, for each and every district, what fraction of the schools were serving meals on that particular day. Now this level of disaggregated data is unheard of, it was not just there. And not only it is provided at the district level, these are clickable reports as well. So if you click on a particular district, let's say Katihar, and then all the sub-districts under that district opens up in real time in the computer, and then you can click on one particular sub-district, then all the Nyaya Panchayats open up. You click the Nyaya Panchayat, the Panchayats open up. You click the Panchayat, the schools open up, and you can then see what each school has responded, or each teacher has responded from each and every school every single day. And now, since you have this data, you can build a lot of applications on top of these databases. For example, if some headmaster has reported that they have not provided meals for the last 7 days, so their response was 0, 0, 0 on a row for 7 days, you can write a simple program to flag those, put a flag against those schools. And then someone calls up those headmasters and asks, why did you not supply midday meals? And then try to solve that problem if there were any supply chain issues and so on, right? So, but in order to do that, you have to know which school is not providing meals, and that's what this technology offers. And this is also uploaded on a publicly accessible website, which is called dopahar.org, where you can essentially provide the school code. Each school has a unique code called DICE code. Even if you don't know the code of a particular school, there is a drop-down menu. You can go to district, then select the sub-district and so on, and see what the headmaster has reported for a given day. So to summarize, this is how the system used to work. So the flow of beneficiary information, first, initially it would be the school headmaster who would be supplying this information. So The school headmaster would supply this information to the block resource person manually. This information would include beneficiary take-up, the status of the funds, how much grain is there in the school, and then the BRP, the block resource person, would essentially take this data every month, feed into an MIS, and then the administration of the district system for education every year. So this frequency was monthly to BRP, and then it went to the district officers and every year. And then the BRP, block resource person, would upload this data on MIS manually, which is a software, and this will go to the district nodal officer for education in charge. And then they are also supposed to audit schools and verify. So this was the job of the block resource personnel. And the district in charge would essentially report all these BRPs, aggregate all this data from all the BRP in a district. They will manually enter the data in MIS, and it goes to the Midday Meal Directorate. And then Midday Meal Directorate releases the funds availability and food grain availability to the schools. And it goes back to the schools following the same chain of commands, right? What did IBRS do? It did that. So it kind of eliminated the middle tier bureaucrats through which information flowed to the Midday Meal Directorate. But they were not obsolete. The data would still come through the traditional mechanism, but you have an additional source of data which is much more frequent and which is much more disaggregated, and it would come directly to the directorate through a completely new parallel system of data collection mechanism. Okay. So what do we do? What are the sources of our data? We have primarily two sources of data that we extensively use for our analysis. The first one is annual status of education report, a SIR data set, and we have Bihar, of course, because the program was introduced in Bihar, and we have 4 other states that we felt are comparable to Bihar: Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, and Madhya Pradesh. And we did not include UP in this list because UP had something similar to begin with, but they were not very cooperative to share the other data set that we wanted from the state government. And so this is essentially a repeated cross-section at school and household level. So for every year, they will go to a certain number of schools in each district and will give us certain variables that are of interest to us. And for each of the villages that were covered in ACER, one government school would be covered, and it is also, they would collect information such as whether midday meal was cooked on the day that the enumerator from ACER went to the school, and whether there was evidence of food being served, and what about the school infrastructure. So this sample includes about 5,000 schools for Bihar and around 20,000 schools for all the 5 states taken together. And this is the second data set that we use extensively. This is annual work plan budget. These are the budgets that are produced by the Midday Meal Directorate and sent for approval to the ministry. And it's a huge report. But the variables that are of interest to us are essentially total number of schools that are serving midday meal, number of beneficiaries availing meals, amount of rice which is consumed, amount of rice that is lifted from FCI godowns, and this is district level data. So the number of observation is much less here. So we have 38 districts from Bihar, and we have about 190 district year observations for only Bihar. And we have overall 157 districts for all the 5 states taken together, around 785 district year observations for all 5 states taken together. Okay, so this is a summary report of what we have. So the first panel is from the annual work plan budget data. So this is the state government report data, and I want you to note the averages for the first 2 variables, right? Or rather, first 4 variables. So percentage of schools, primary schools serving midday meals according to government report is 99%. And that's in Bihar, and not only in Bihar, in other states as well, is 99% of the schools are serving midday meals. But if you look at the ACER data, schools that are providing midday meals for the entire period you'll see that it's only 65%. So there's a huge discrepancy between what the independently collected NGO finds and what the annual work plan budget data tells you. And we are essentially investigating these two sources of information on the same outcome variable, that is whether a school is providing meals or not. And the one question could be call completion rates. So if calls are made, are they always picked up by the headmaster? And these are those rates. So you can see in a given month, typically the number of calls would range between 20 to, or rather 19 to 25-ish, depending on holidays and other stuff. And you can see there are some big drops in the month of June and all that, because these are summer months and so on. So you can see that roughly 80% of the calls are picked up by the headmasters and they do not go to voice messages. And this is a heat map of the call completion rates. So where are headmasters? So we know exact location of each of the 80,000 schools in Bihar, and we know their response for all the schools for a period right after the program started. So in 2012 April onward until 2017 and 18. So we could figure out for each school what is the call completion rate, and essentially we mapped it out by if the color is red, then the call completion rate is very, very low. If the color is blue, then the call completion rate is very, very high. And you can see that it is scattered all over the place. But around Ganga, Ganges is in, I don't know if you can see it, but in the middle of Bihar, Ganga crosses, and those are the places where headmasters are reporting to this particular phone call much more frequently compared to the peripheries, which are to the southwestern Bihar and the upper parts of Bihar.
Can't this be just the connectivity?
Could be the connectivity issues, right? So connectivity to the telephone numbers could be driving these factors.
When you say call completion rate, it's about them answering the IVR as well.
Yep.
Not just the picking it up.
Yeah, so whether they answered the IVRS call or not.
On the previous slide, where you had the tabulation, where you had the point, so upper one was 99 point something,
Yeah.
whereas below you had written 0.65. So I think in terms of just the units, it should be at least 65 rather than 99.65.
Oh yeah, so I should have multiplied by 100 because
Yes.
yeah.
I was just wondering about that.
Okay. I mean, it could have been just 0.65% served midday meals, and they conveniently reported 99%.
That would be a story.
Yeah. Okay. So, as I said earlier, the estimation frameworks involves two strategies. The first one is event study framework, where I look at the average midday meal served in Bihar before and after the program, and after controlling for a bunch of district level observations and school level observations. And then we also have a difference in difference framework where we compare Bihar and the rest of the states where this policy was not instituted, and we do it annually. So typically difference in difference analysis is done as a comparison between pre and post, but our result was so stark that we could actually afford to break it up by year to show you how things changed. And this is how things changed. Okay. So you can see the blue line there. So this is coming from Acer data, right? So blue line is essentially showing that 90% of the schools in Acer data says that they served midday meals, and that fraction doesn't really change over time. So these are all states except Bihar. Okay.
But this is not just the other four. This is all
This is ASER for four states on the control states. Okay. And look at Bihar. Before IBRS, it was down below around close to 55-ish%, and there's a substantial jump in 2012. And then it declines a little bit, but the jump persists. So that's essentially what we are estimating in our data set. So in a difference, ultimately in economics literature, if you cannot have a picture that says out loud, no matter how much estimate that you present, this picture should be convincing enough. And if I do this in econometrics, these are what the
Can we
results
go
are.
back to this
Yeah.
picture, please? So what are the other 4 states again?
So these are Jharkhand, MP, Odisha, and Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh.
So they aren't really breakout states, they're not Kerala.
No,
And yet, you find
Yeah.
Assad, wow, Assad
And
is
then
very good.
most of them are neighbors actually.
These are neighbors.
yeah. That's why we excluded Kerala and Tamil Nadu and other states down south. And the result, yes,
Can you explain why we are having decline after the program?
that I don't know. So this is just sheer data. What could be the reasons behind the decline? We are not sure about. So, but here we also see the decline in the numbers as well. If you look at, so this is just data from Bihar, and this is ACER data set. We are analyzing 2 variables that ACER reports. First, whether the school that the ACER enumerator went, the school provides meals and midday meal was cooked on the day of inspection. These 2 variables that we are looking. After control, so the second and the 4th column have the same outcome variable, but it additionally controls for some other school specific variables. That's why the number of observation just drops in column 2 from column 1, and then again in column 4 to column 3. And you can clearly see that both the variables which measures whether the school provides a meal or not, in percentage terms, there is a statistically significant improvement. And at the bottom, what we represent is post-IVRS minus pre-IVRS. So essentially, we are subtracting the effect from, let's say, 15.10, subtracting 3.47 from 15.0. And this is the statistic that we are reporting here. So essentially here it will be reporting subtracting 5.94 from 10.5. What is the effect before and after the IVRS was implemented? And all
And that
the-
should be compared relative to the top number.
yeah, so that should be compared relative to the top number. So the baseline average, that means before the IVRS kicked in, according to ACER data, about 56% of schools claimed that they provide meals, and the enumerator found that about 50% were actually serving meals on the day of when they went to collect the data. And the improvement was on the baseline of 50% to 12%. So that is a 24% increase in the provision of midday meals. Yes.
Am I can list what variables are negotiable for you?
So here there are a lot of school characteristics, whether the school has a toilet or not, girls' toilet separate from boys' toilet, whether it's a boundary wall or not, number of teachers, whether it received grants. So these are the variables that we are controlling for. I don't remember the entire list, but quite a bit. There are also district-specific fixed effects as well, in order to counter for the fact that districts could be different. Schools in different districts could be different. Now this is just from Bihar. If we do a difference in difference estimate, so now we are comparing Bihar from the rest of the states, and again typically these estimates are done just by pre-post analysis. Our result was so stark that we could break out by year to show exactly when this kicks in. Right at 2012, you see a huge increase in the provision of midday meals. And now, surprisingly, if you look at the AWPB data, the annual work plan budget that is essentially submitted by the state government to the ministry, the story completely changes, right? So other states are still claiming that 100%, represented by the blue line, that they are essentially 100% of the schools are serving midday meals, but suddenly for Bihar, which is the broken red line there is a slight drop in the percentage of schools that are claiming that they are serving midday meals, right? So these two data sets are completely in opposite direction in terms of effects. And this is also present if we estimate this econometrically as well. So again, close to from 1.6 percentage points, or rather, if you look at pre versus post IVRS in the upper primary and primary schools, the decline was about 1.5 percentage points to 5.3 percentage points. So the government reports are saying that lesser and lesser schools are providing midday meals after IVRS. But if you look at the NGO data, it is telling us that more and more schools are providing midday meals. Sorry. And it is there in the difference and difference analysis as well. If I compare Bihar with the rest of the states, I see the exact same story. Okay. So this is, these two results alone potentially point out to the fact that earlier, when before IVRS, schools were probably, or states were submitting inflated data to the AWPB committee in order to get more resources. Then we do a bunch of robustness tests on it, and given we have only a few minutes, 10-15 minutes or so, I do 13 minutes. I wouldn't get into the details, but I will just roughly tell you what we did. This is the benchmark result which I just showed you. This is just, I have not breaking them up by year, I'm just showing pre-post what is the difference. Then we added district specific trends. So we assume that each and every district in the data set were following their own linear trend. Even after controlling for that, the effect size is exactly the same. Then we did something which is referred to as generalized DID. So essentially we could predict schools or districts which are similar in terms of their composition in Bihar and outside Bihar. And these are essentially predicted probabilities of being in Bihar and being outside other 4 districts, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, MP and Odisha. And what we did, we chopped off the ends of the 2 distributions to make the districts look very, very similar. And you can also see that in the averages, where for the states, control states in Bihar, the differences are statistically insignificant. So this means that these districts are selectively similar in Bihar versus the control states. If we do the analysis for those selected sample, we still get the exact same estimate almost. We do a propensity score matching. That's another way to do the same thing. And even with this, where we are essentially re-weighting the observations to make sure that the control and the treated or Bihar districts are very, very similar, even there we see very similar results. So no matter what metric that we use, how rigorous model we use, our robustness result shows or tells us that indeed the effects were high. Then we also look at what happens to rice consumption and the amount of rice that was actually lifted from FCI godowns. And what we find here is that, sorry, there should have been stars. Some of the stars are missing for some reason here. If you look at column number 1 and column number 2, so 3. This is how much rice that was being consumed in primary school. And that increased by 2,162 metric tons before and after IVRS. And the amount of rice that was lifted in those schools, that remains exactly the same. Okay? So that means consumption has increased, but this is coming out of new food grains or food grains that is coming to the system which was not there earlier, and the data matches almost exactly. It's uncanny how well this data matches. Similarly, the same effects we see for upper primary schools as well, and if we do difference and difference, we also see very similar results. So we see that more and more rice is being consumed in Bihar primary and upper primary schools, and this consumption is coming not due to the existing stock is being utilized properly, but it's almost same amount of additional rice is being lifted from FCI godowns. So this tells us that probably nobody was siphoning rice, okay? Because of course if you provide more midday meals, you need more rice, and the amount of rice that you are additionally using is, you need to lift those much amount of rice as well. However, there's another thing that we did. We looked at enrollment. So this data is coming from USER as well, enrollment and attendance. So there were some pre-trends in the data, so we estimated a trend break model. And if you look at the very last row, which says Bihar interacted with post, 2012, that is gamma 3 in this paper. You can see so the columns, different column represents different grades, class 1, class 2, up to class 5. For each and every class or grade, suddenly the enrollment numbers have decreased in Bihar right after 2012. But if you look at attendance, then it's a completely different story altogether. So attendance has improved. So it tells us that that enrollment figures are probably getting corrected, which was inflated earlier. And since meals are provided more frequently, the number of schools attending schools has improved. So this is the story that we can get out of this. At the same time, so since we know that we have these quarterly progress reports from government of Bihar, and we also have the enrollment data that the headmasters report to the IBRS system, and we could actually create a distribution to see whether these two distributions match or not. So what we are trying to say here, we have the same data from two different sources. One, the data is on enrollment. How many kids are enrolled in each and every school in Bihar? The two sources are, first source is coming from the government data, that is quarterly progress report, how many kids are enrolled, and the second one is coming from IBRS, and if we plot the distribution, they correspond to each other. Okay. But if you plot the distribution of beneficiaries from the same data set, we see a completely different picture, right? So what we see here, so the QPR report on the number of beneficiaries is way to the right of the number of beneficiaries reported in the IBRS system. So immediately it tells you, and we tested whether these two distributions are statistically significant or not, and they are very, very statistically significant, right? It's telling you that the QPR reports are much more inflated compared to what is the headmaster reporting to the IBRS system. So there is some inflation, or there was some inflation in the reporting of the number of beneficiaries. We investigated whether there was quality-quantity trade-off or not. So if a lot of schools are suddenly, like around 24% of schools are more like or more serving midday meals more, does the quality of meals deteriorate? And there's a lot of collection that went on to creating this table. We had to cull this out of inspection reports, and we do not find anything actually. So these reports tell you whether how many schools they found good quality meals, bad quality meals, sufficient quality meals, and insufficient quality meals. So these are inspection reports that are sent to the ministry by eminent scholars or retired professors in different colleges. They are sent at random to school to inspect, and they submit these reports in PDF copies to the ministry. All these reports are available online. So we downloaded all the PDFs, cleaned up the data, and ran the analysis for Bihar and for the rest of the states. But it says that the quality has improved and sufficiency of the meals have improved as well. So there was no quality-quantity trade-off. And then what we did is we also looked at if a headmaster is completing the calls, does it really mean that students are more likely to attend those schools? Now, this is something that we cannot draw inferences on causality, because it is headmaster's choice to pick up the phone call and receive the calls from IBRS system. But nonetheless, we do find very positive correlations between the number of completed calls and average daily attendance, average daily meals, average daily attendance over enrollment, and so on and so forth. So essentially, the way to read this information is, if you look at column number 1, so if a headmaster complete one call, the marginal effect of that translates into 0.6 kids, additional kids attending that particular school. Okay, so the more likely they are to pick up these calls, the attendance rates of that school increases. And these are very, very statistically significant results. And then this is just the pure attendance number, so there's no level here. And if you look at attendance over enrollment, so percentage of enrolled student who are attending, that increases by about 0.21 if they just accept one phone call coming from the IBRS system. So that's a marginal effect of one phone call going from the IBRS to a particular school headmaster. And You can look at the number of observations here. We have about 2 million observations. This is school daily data on which we are regressing, and we have about 80,000 fixed effects because these are the number of schools, and we also have 80,000 time trends. So we have assumed different time trends for different schools. Still, these results are very, very strong. So that is the summary of what we just saw earlier. I will skip this in the interest of time. Another thing that we wanted to talk to, this is preliminary results, so that's why I kept it at the end. We haven't fleshed them out in detail. But another thing that we have noticed, ACER also administers this arithmetic and reading test to the kids. But we found surprisingly that in Bihar, in public schools, right after 2005, the scores for these tests that were administered suddenly decreases. Okay, so both for arithmetic and for reading tests. And that is given by the second column here. All these coefficients are negative here, and all these coefficients here are also negative. Some of them are significant, others are not. But if you look at private schools, they are very tiny and they are hardly negative or statistically significant. So this tells us that somehow what has happened in Bihar after 2012 is that number of enrollment has gone down, number of attendance has improved, yet their test scores have worsened in public school, but somehow they did not worsen in private schools. Right? So we are yet to pin down what were the actual mechanisms, why did this happen. One hypothesis could be that since headmasters are getting more involved in provision of meals, maybe they are paying less attention towards educating. Could be that since meals are served more regularly, the marginal kid who is coming to school induced by this food is coming from a weaker socioeconomic background, so that is lowering the average test score for the entire class. But these are competing hypotheses. We have no way to substantiate this at this moment. So we have ton of more data that we are essentially analyzing this right now, and this data set is so large that our computer is just collapsing every time we want to do any analysis on it. But nonetheless, a lot to be done. But what so far we could show is from NGO collected data, it shows that the performance of midday meals have improved substantially. At the same time, the government data set shows that the lesser and lesser schools are providing meals. So these two cannot go hand in hand unless there was some over-reporting into the system. And so we also used central government audit data, and it reveals that the quality of the meals did not deteriorate either, neither did sufficiency. We also find enrollment decreases but attendance increases, and taken together what we could say that it could reduce leakages, and we are yet to do a cost benefit analysis. If we can really see how many, so from the state government data we can figure out how many less kids are attending or beneficiaries are being affected now because their numbers is decreasing. We can multiply that by the per kid allotment of funds, so you can figure out that is the money that is savings to the state exchequer, and the cost to the system of IBRS, we know it upfront, it's 60 lakh rupees per annum for that entire state. So we are doing that cost benefit analysis rigorously to figure out what is the bang for buck for this technology. So in a nutshell, monitoring, simple monitoring without any consequences potentially can improve public service delivery, and this is one case where we saw that just increasing the frequency of data collection and at a much disaggregated level, making it public, just doing that can improve delivery of public services.